Hey guys, it's Tom and Scott here from BadCuzDad. Today we are looking at a video from Ginger Prime talking about the third era of the MMO. Are MMOs dying or entering a golden age? Let's find out. Alright Scott, let's jump into the video and see what Ginger Prime has to say about the evolution of MMOs and see if we agree or not.
Over the last few weeks, I've been building this series up to reach this video right here, titled The Third Age of the MMORPG. Now, this is what I believe to be a new golden age for the genre that I've invested so much time into over the last 2 decades. Now, all of these videos together, I believe, tell a rich story about the state of the genre, and that only a few years ago was commonly believed to be a dying genre, if you go by the subreddit alone. Now, if you haven't seen those videos or don't have the time to watch them, as a brief summary, there have been 3 ages of the MMORPG. The first age was the genre was born age. This was built off the power of the internet, and new experiences were discovered by players. In reality, depending on who you ask, this is considered the golden age of the MMO, when everything was new, fresh, and ideas were allowed to run rampant. Now, this takes us right into the second age. This is when World of Warcraft came on the scene, and this was a cultural phenomenon kind of game. Regardless of how you feel about it today or how you felt about it in the past, WoW's contribution to the genre as a whole is both positive and negative in terms of making it such a mainstream thing where I talk to gamers who've never been a gamer before and haven't been since. They just played World of Warcraft to now, where people essentially have this as the lexicon of the genre itself. In fact, if you make an MMO today, there is tribute you have to always make to World of Warcraft, because if you don't, it doesn't translate as well. And I know that statement's not going to sit well with some of my Final Fantasy brethren, as I came in with Final Fantasy 11, but we'll get to that more in a second. But note that the keyboard setup, the hotbar setup, there's a lot of things that you have to commonly set up because they've defined a common language within the genre, and that's just a statement of fact. Now, the third age is the age that we're in now. This actually began...
All right, let's pause it there. Do you agree with his assessment on like the first age versus the second age?
Yeah, because the first stage was exploratory. It's something that hadn't been done before, and people latched onto it. I set the bar high. It took what EverQuest did. It took elements from there and just revolutionized it. It's like taking, the first engine and then turning it into a Ferrari, essentially. So I agree with that assessment, and clearly that's the case. Been there for almost 20 years now.
Yeah, my feelings on first age versus the second age is that the first age was more like a social hub. The games were not super advanced at that point. Some of them were still like turn-based, you know what I mean? They started with MUDs where it was like turn-based and stuff like that. And so You remember like AOL Instant Messenger, the thing was just to get online and talk to friends. And I feel like these games kind of provided that space, especially like late 90s.
It was like, hey, I could make this avatar that's like me and I can go hang out in a digital world with other people.
And then WoW, after that ran its course, kind of built on that, and it became, hey, not only is this a place where we can meet with our friends, but hey, the game is actually pretty cool. Like, this is a real RPG we can play and invest time and build our character and see his story progress, as well as meeting with our friends, right? And we saw that was still cool because, vanilla WoW, you still had to form your groups and run to the dungeon, right? And run to the raid and have 40 people. But as time progressed, they added LFG, LFR. The game was, especially as social media hit, right? We no longer needed games to be our social hub. We're on Discord. We're connecting outside of game, right? And so now we just want the game to be good, but then just get us to the content quickly. I don't know if this is where he's going to go, but that could be a transition into the third age where it doesn't have to be as much of a social hub anymore. It's like, hey, we're dads now. We have a little bit of time to play. Let's get us to the fun stuff as quickly as possible. All right, let's see what he says is the third era. I'm pretty interested.
And because of a lot of reasons, we're seeing the new dawn of the MMO as a whole. And I hope this video actually helps that explore that idea with you, to share some hopium, if you will, but to also look at how the genre has changed and the impact that it's had on me and you, the MMO player. Now, this video is going to focus on kind of 3 themes: technology, investment, and overall desire, kind of running through the entire conversation. Now those might not necessarily seem connected, but I do believe by the end of this video, you'll at least understand my thought process a little bit better. Now I've been playing the MMORPG since Final Fantasy XI, and the majority of my MMO experience is personally tied to Final Fantasy XI and Final Fantasy XIV, but I do have lots of love and passion for Guild Wars 2, New World, Lost Ark. Not necessarily a big WoW guy. I'm not going to try to dunk on WoW in this video, but note that that's going to come up a little bit. And a huge Destiny fan. Now, whether you classify Destiny as an MMO or not, the developers do. It's going to be an interesting future for that genre and game, so we'll explore that later in future videos. Now, I personally reject a lot of the common thought around MMORPGs today. Right and wrong, I'm going to own that and how I perceive this, and I'm going to tell you exactly what I think and why I think the way that I do. Now, I do look at things both as a player but also as a developer, and like everyone else on the internet, I try to fill in any gaps of knowledge that I don't know. For example, I don't know what Square Enix is doing and meeting behind the scenes, but I do fill in with life experiences based off of what they have taught me and what they've said, and try to give you the best analysis possible. However, that is just the way that I look at things, and I usually end up falling usually outside
Destiny.
of that common thought within it.
So he just mentioned a couple games. I'm obviously a big Guild Wars 2 player.
Yeah.
I've played a bit of Destiny as well. You obviously played WoW, pretty hardcore.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, maybe it still has time to change. We'll see. Okay, so we'll see. Hopefully his opinions are on point. Let's see.
Adversarial, I just look at things in a different way, and that's usually what I try to present in these videos. So all of that long intro out of the way, if you're still around here, you are amazing, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk to you guys about the genre and why I think we're in for a bright future for the MMORPG and so much more. So how did we get here? I think that's really the key aspect, because this sets up where we're going. The third age of the MMO really started to take shape with the issues of World of Warcraft with Battle of Azeroth. It was happening before. Obviously, Shadowlands didn't help it any more than that, but here we actually get to see the WoW dominance ingrained in people's mind over the last 15 plus years really lose its grip on the genre as a whole. Now, for so long, people have generally thought of the MMORPG as World of Warcraft. In fact, that's exactly what I would always ask people. When you think MMORPG, what do you think of? And the majority of people, if we're playing like Family Feud, would come back and say World of Warcraft is pretty much the one key point for the video games. Now, this is something similar that we saw in the past with things like Nintendo, where when you ask people, oh, do you play Nintendo? Do you play video games? And Nintendo was essentially that kind of core aspect, even though they were only a small part, well, at the time, the massive part, but overall just a part of the industry as a whole. There were other things going on, but it was so ingrained into players that that's exactly what it was. So that's how I see the MMO before and going into it. Now, this is really good that we're actually seeing this kind of decline and rebalancing within it, because the longest time, WoW could not be beaten. No matter how many people put out however many clones, it would never dethrone it. Rightfully so, because you're offering something less for some.
Yeah, he's got a point, because I started, my first MMO was Star Wars The Old Republic, which dropped in 2012. And after I started playing it and got an understanding of what MMOs were, I was like, I have to go back and play WoW, because I feel like I'm missing like a piece of my MMO history almost. Like I have to understand and see, like, is this game really good? Now, obviously it wasn't super for me. I did play it a decent amount. Since it wasn't my first MMO, I did, it wasn't my first love with MMOs, but he's right. I had to go back and check it out, which just shows the power and the legacy that it has.
To be fair, all you did was like mess with your UI the whole time. So I mean,
well, that is really the end game, messing with your weak auras and all your cooldown timers and stuff like that.
Yeah, and he kind of echoes what I said earlier. It's that it's ingrained. Like when you think MMO, you think WoW. Clearly, that's what the other companies thought too. They set out to make their own MMO, because it was essentially just a reskinned WoW in almost every sense. Even Star Wars, we talked about that in the video about it.
And that could be his point of why it's taken so long to break out of that second age, because it's such a titan of the, it just totally dominated everything, and everyone was bought in, and you have the sunk cost of having all this time put into your character, and so to break away, was really tough. All right, let's see where it goes.
Something saying, hey, you're ingrained in this community. Now, in the end, WoW actually dethroned itself. But don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to sit here and hate on WoW. It's not something that you're hearing. I'm looking at it from a pure investment in the genre as a whole. The primary thought from publishers is, why invest in an MMO when it's so much easier to invest in something like a battle royale or some other genre, a mobile game, for example. Now, MMO players are fiercely loyal, and even if they do like check out your game, because that would happen and WoW clone would pop up, people would go check it out. It wouldn't have everything, that you want, and you would just kind of return to your home base. Same thing I did with Final Fantasy 11 all the time. And obviously them not sticking around and asking for more money just ended up telling everybody like this was a genre that was done. Like we've set the standard, the mold. There really isn't going to be a lot of...
Yep, I do that with Star Wars still. I check out a new game and I'll play it. And a lot of times they're good, but I'll always check in. Man, that's a good point. Kind of like a home base, right? I'll go check out the new expansions. I'll get my guy to max level. I'll do PvP. And then I'll wander out and check out the new things.
It's a great point. The word ingrained keeps coming up for me. Became so used to what WoW offered. It was good. It wasn't always the best, but it was comfortable, and it met the desires that we were trying to, or that we had when we stepped into an MMO. Anything that didn't quite match up fell short, and if a game didn't try and emulate WoW, it ultimately failed. And that's a problem in and of itself, because that completely takes innovation out of the equation. They're afraid to take risks, because anytime they have taken that risk, the game didn't pan out how they intended it to, because everybody already had this idealized version of what an MMO should be. So almost all innovation stopped.
That's a great point, because not only did the clones not live up to expectations, like you're saying, the games that did actually try something new, people weren't ready to move on to that new thing. The best example I can think of is Wildstar. And in a lot of ways, it still carried some of the same things over, but it was trying to be new with action combat. Man, I was so hyped for Wildstar, but it just didn't catch on, and they made mistakes. But you're right. Some of the things that innovated, just people weren't ready to make the move yet. And obviously now it seems like they are.
Playing space, a lot of room for that. And this has since changed. The playing field has actually now become more even out than it's ever been before, and MMO players have actually become more nomadic and seasonal for the game. We'll talk a little bit more of that in a second, but this actually allows for more games to have healthy interactions. This means from the player side and the publisher side as well. And thus, with this, has actually allowed the industry to not become so top heavy, to where investors are sitting here and saying, hey, maybe we can make this kind of game, or we could try this kind of thing. And ultimately being told, it's not really worth the risk. They're not going to come play your game, or they're not going to stick around. So MMOs also don't exist in a bubble. So while this is happening with World of Warcraft, outside of the genre, obviously you have a lot of things that are happening. They aren't as novel as they were once upon a time. The original idea of these interactions and these attractions that the MMOs of being always online and offering a living world really didn't necessarily translate in the long run of things.
Look at that.
But also because of that being more commonplace as a part of this living world, or these other games offering newer ideas and better attractions, they also offered, I struggled on that line, a better monetization, or different kind of monetization, which ended up being more inviting in the long run. So actually, when we look back at the second age of the MMO, the age of WoW, it's non-stable in terms of growth. One of the core aspects that I've continued to argue as a parent when I look at this, at just the whole state of gaming, younger generations were not playing MMORPGs. When I sat down and talked to nephews, even into their 20s, the MMO was pretty much non-existent, not even something they were interested in, because it offered too many barriers to actually jumping in. Some of that can be considered a strength. I've talked to many of you guys about how communities around MMOs, especially with subscription fees, tend to be more awesome.
That is a fantastic point that I never actually thought about. WoW came out in 2004. You and I, well, you're a little bit older than I am, but I was 19, 20 when it came out. Yeah, I never thought of it. The people playing today, probably babies. They were infants when it first came out. So now that generation that we grew up with is now in our generation of being dads and having more responsibilities, not being able to put 8+ hours a day into WoW. And that's just something I never considered.
Yeah, and I think the other point too that he just made is that the barrier to entry point. So kids, they're coming up, they're playing a game. What is the most accessible, popular game right now? Like you mentioned, it's Battle Royale. There are absolutely zero barriers to entry. Most of them are free to play. You can jump in with your friends right away. There's no gear grind. If you want to play that type of game, you can play a single player RPG, which is really story rich, and you can go at your own pace. And so the MMO is definitely a niche that to keep growing it is you need to create an MMO that's still competitive, has the RPG elements, the story, but has less barriers to entry. And for me, less barriers to entry means, I mean, I talk about Guild Wars a lot. There's only horizontal progression at max level. You don't have to keep getting better gear and higher. You get max gear and then World of Warcraft moves the goalposts. Oh, now at next patch I have to get even better gear.
Yeah,
whereas Guild Wars you get
essentially
max
hitting
level
the
and you just
reset
go.
button.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if he thinks MMOs are gonna remove a lot of those barriers, which, you know.
And that brings up the whole case involving somebody like us who is time restricted. You know, we put all this, and that's what ultimately got me to stop WoW, is that I could no longer justify having to restart every time. I began to look at the amount of time and years that I put into this game, and that every time an expansion came out, good job, you put in all that time, let's go ahead and start over.
And if you have alts, you have to do it 2 or 3 times. Yeah, that's true.
It's exhausting after a while. It feels like a job.
And it seems unnecessary. It seems like a mechanic just to keep you engaged rather than let's make something fun that people want to do.
Yeah, it keeps you feeling like you have to play even when you don't necessarily want to.
And that's my experience too. Whenever I've jumped into previous free-to-play MMOs, generally it's just a bunch of people just like, I'm not really invested. I'm just here to cause chaos, and going on from there. But overall, we're starting to see the business models shifting and actually becoming more inviting. And we're seeing that within several mainstream MMOs like Elder Scrolls Online. If again, we can bring up Destiny in terms of its chaos and the problems that all of these have. No system that I'm mentioning with any of these games, guys, is 100% perfect. Every system is going to have its flaws, and even the subscription model itself has its flaws, because ultimately, if people aren't coming into the genre is just aging out. You know, you're not getting younger, and if you are, you should totally share and tell me how in the comments below. I'd love to figure that out. But beyond that fantasy itself, the fantasy around MMORPGs hasn't really offered anything new that other genres haven't been more willing to explore. Investors have been obviously more willing to put money into it because they're seeing easier returns on it. And so these MMOs haven't existed in a bubble. So this might seem personally like a bad idea for old school players. Obviously having MMO players become more nomadic, more seasonal overall. And it's not that all of us are going to be more nomadic or more seasonal. There's still going to be players that are going to be fiercely loyal to game X. But if they're willing to try out game Y or game Z, then ultimately it's going to be better overall.
Real quick, another point about the monetization. I think before, when you had $15 a month, you were an invested player, right? You were willing to do the grind. You knew the path you had to take. But now that games are, there's a lot of free-to-play models. Again, that barrier to entry on payment is removed. So if you're going to make a player stick with a game that's free to play, you better get to the fun right away, and it better hook you, because you're not paying $15 a month. What's stopping you from just trying the next game? And I feel like that's a good thing. It's gonna make game developers work for that player and remove the stuff that we don't like and get us to the stuff we do like right away and keep more of it coming.
The reason I'm so positive on this is because I don't see that like a subscription-based MMO as being completely gone. I see it completely being an option that players can have, but having a more flexible business model and going away from having to have people log in each and every day, kind of essentially burning them out to the point where they're just done, is changing. And I see gamers shifting more to that seasonal flow. And this is obviously, I think, being led by some of the ideas that we see with Yoshi P and Final Fantasy 14, as its model is more optional content as opposed to like, here's your job, you got to do this, you got to keep getting that daily active user coming back and back and back again each and every day. Now, this might seem obviously like a bad idea for old school players out there like myself, but in reality, like, those players are still going to exist. They're going to exist continually to like play the game that they want. And I'm not advocating that they have to become nomads, but when we look at the numbers, when we look at how people play games, Yeah, they kind of tend to hop around, and that's actually very healthy for the genre. I think it's very healthy for the player. And the fact that they're also willing to return at some point gives them a healthier approach. Whenever I'm feeling kind of tired of a game, rather than continuing to stick with it until I get over that burnout, I can pop in, enjoy something else, and actually return and be excited about returning. And the fact that we're seeing that kind of flow within the genres itself, or especially the MMO, is actually a great idea, because it helps the good ideas, the new ideas, things that people are willing to test, float to the very top, and it lets a bad idea come along and not completely crater a whole game. This essentially reducing risk, because risk is something publishers like to avoid, and because of that, they can actually experiment with new ideas, knowing that it can help either breathe in new life, a new like perspective of players, but at the same time, it also, like, if you miss, you don't end up like having to just completely suffer for years, or have to shut down because of it. That wasn't always the case. And so with the fact that MMOs became so risky, and players were so kind of like stuck where they were, ultimately it just became like, yeah, that's what this genre is. It's not worth it to try and be creative, because it ends up just like hurting us in the end, because it's not going to necessarily be received. And that ultimately led to a lot of the frustration and groaning from players about how the genre really isn't doing anything unique, because the players themselves are also kind of a part of that. It's kind of, a chicken and the egg problem that we've had. But ultimately, we're seeing that with a flexible business model, with seasonal nomad MMO players willing to try out new games, but good ideas can float to the top. And this kind of gets me into the idea of technology. Now, technology over the last 20 years has changed dramatically. And one of the biggest impacts this last 20 years has been that of the cloud. Now, MMOs have always been online, and one of the...
Yeah, and I know you've called me a serial game hopper for years now, because I like to bounce around to different games. But to his point, a lot of the games are just, sometimes you play it and nothing fresh. Even though you like the game, you're lacking on fresh content or ideas, and so you see something else. And so I'll bounce from MMOs to shooters, or a couple different MMOs. And I like when an MMO, when it doesn't feel like a job, because you can go to a different one, get the new content, and then when the new content comes out for the other game you really like, you can go there. And so you at one point were like, I'm WoW all the way. This is what I play back in the day. And that's been a while, but have your thoughts progressed? It seems like you're playing a lot more games these days and trying new things.
Yeah, I mean, well, to be clear, I was a WoW fanboy, like he said earlier, I had a loyalty to that game. Probably because I knew how much time I sunk into it. And so I felt obligated to have that loyalty to it. So even the thought of trying another game was just out of the realm of possibility, because I couldn't justify going to something else after I'd spent all this time and effort in WoW. Now, with the influx of games and newer stuff with newer ideas, it's become tough to justify just staying into one game. And as you get older, I'm sure, as we've experienced, that time changes. The amount of time that you want to dedicate to it just kind of starts to dwindle after a while, because you can't keep up that kind of gaming regiment with all the other things going on. You just physically can't do it, nor do I want to anymore. I'm more open to it because I feel like if it doesn't require that much time and diligence, and I can play new content, then why shouldn't I do it? If it's enjoyable and I can hop in with friends, then I think I should.
Yeah, I think they might even have like groups for people like you, like WoW Anonymous. I'm not sure.
WoW Anonymous.
Yeah. So, but anyway, all right, let's go.
I just
aspects
had
to them
to get those
is
dailies
with the
done.
advancements both in AI and cloud technology. And in fact, companies are actually more willing to invest in this genre again. And so we'll soon be seeing, like kind of in the next 10 years or so, more experiences that can have only been imagined as a kid. You ever wanted to see 1,000 versus 1,000 player war? What that would be like, and it's actually would be possible with cloud computing. Now, is it fun? We have no idea. Like, it could be just the worst idea ever. However, if somebody's willing to kind of put that time into it, who knows? Maybe it will be fun. Maybe it'll end up becoming something that we've always wanted to see and experience in terms of a video game. But also, we now also shift our advancements into AI. And all of a sudden, something really magical happens when we start bringing in more AI into the MMO. Now, looking back, obviously, a lot of people remember how connected they were to MMOs. And this was due to there not being 1,000 other things that pulled you away. MMO's real competition didn't come from other MMOs, it came more from like social media, acting as that social chat room, thus really keeping you from needing to log in and talk to your friends. But here we are, and I think AI can actually bridge the gap between the old school and the new. So here's how. MMOs will continue to offer single player experiences. You really can't walk that back. It's very healthy for me, as especially somebody who's busy. Maybe I have a little bit of time, I can log in and I can play a little bit. And rather than sitting here and say, well, I don't have time to form a group to go and do this, it's going to take just 2 hours to get ready to go do the thing that's going to take an hour, I can just go ahead and, you know, go into this other thing that's going to offer something very quick. You hit me that nice quick bit of dopamine. This tended to be, you see a lot of players migrate to mobile or other genres. So I don't see the single player approach to having some MMO aspects in there going away. Now, I do see something like maybe the Drivatar system from Forza, I almost said Final Fantasy, coming in, meaning that as I play the game, friends could actually take my AI out there on adventures with them, especially let's say you're running late from work, you got a family, you got things that come up, but your friends need you for a raid. Well, not really an issue. Just bring my AI warrior along, and when I get home, maybe I just am able to pop right in and join them in progress and take over for my AI. Now imagine a world being connected by a digital self representing you in these persistent worlds, powered by...
That is insane. I've never thought about that, but that's kind of cool.
I haven't either.
Like in Star Wars, The Old Republic, like your companions could be your friends, like going on adventures, their characters instead of... That's kind of a cool idea.
Everybody just taking their OP friend everywhere.
Yeah, that is cool though. It's a little more immersive though. Even though you know it's not them, it's still a nice touch. Maybe
It is.
I don't know if I'd want to jump in the middle of a raid, but maybe I would. Maybe if my guy was going with your character and then I get on, I'm just being able to jump right in. That could be interesting. So I don't know. That's cool.
We're gonna we quickly learn how much better the AI is than us.
That's a good point. Yeah,
They'd be like, hey, Tom, can you just log off again, please? Thanks.
Push the right buttons, please. Okay. Yep.
Player. This will allow these games to balance you for parties, saying that you should be able to bring your friends and that the player has to choose to play with real people, or maybe their AI, friends that aren't even on at the moment, or maybe even a blend of both, being able to take real people and some AI to kind of fill in the gap. From a game design perspective, this would allow developers to balance the MMO around that mindset rather than have to sit here and balance it out completely so that a single person isn't going to get destroyed out in the open world. You could say, hey, this game is going to kick your butt, and so
I would just troll you and try to get your avatar killed the entire time.
Well, as long as I don't have to pay repair costs, I think I'd be okay.
Or take robots with you at any point in time. And I think that's going to be something that you could end up seeing a little bit health bring back. Yeah, you're going to play with AI. Yeah, you're going to play with friends, but it ultimately gives you the flexibility. And so from a design perspective, it helps even things out in a more, I guess, living world kind of perspective. But obviously, we'll have to wait and see. I personally believe that this is where we're headed with the MMO. It's going to just take a little bit of time to get there. And I'm personally very excited to see how that ultimately plays out in the long run. Now, before I move into the last kind of idea, desire, hopefully you felt like desire is listed throughout all of this. The fact that we're seeing publishers put in items, the fact that we're seeing new MMOs being created and being talked about and being covered and being watched, all of these things I think are incredibly positive outlooks, incredibly positive data points for the genre as a whole. I love that we're seeing people actually make MMOs again, but also seeing people more willing to play them and even just watch them. This is kind of a return to what the genre used to be back when pretty much people were playing. There wasn't one dominant king of the hill that was defining the genre for 15 years. Now, in the end, players are going to obviously have your personal preference for a game, your business model, and all those should exist, giving players more freedom of choice when it comes to these games itself. That's why I feel like the future is so bright. I think that's why we are going to have a really exciting time for the genre, because again, if players are willing to try out ideas, if publishers are willing to invest in ideas and risk, then you can start to see things that we've been maybe hungry for and we didn't know we wanted until they finally delivered it. And it isn't so punishing when things happen. And then again, like at the end of the day, when it comes down to game development, and when we talk about project management, the thing game development versus project management has to bring to the table is passion. It's desire. It's to have the people who want to make those kind of games, because there are people who want to play those kind of games. And generally when you are able to deliver on that, that's usually when you kind of find magic in the bottle. It's rare and it's hard, and And that's one of the hardest things for games to do, is kind of deliver on that aspect, being able to surprise and at the same time not necessarily overwhelm a player, so they're willing to check it out, give it the time that it needs, and hopefully it grows from there.
So what he's talking about there is, you have to have a group of people who want to make these types of games. And to be fair, if we look at one example, Ashes of Creation is being made by a guy, Steven Sharif, who is a former Lineage 2 player, big into Arcade, like ran one of the biggest guilds and very successful in business. And so one day he just said, I can do better, or I can make a version that I like. And as people our age are now on successful with careers, hopefully we'll see some of these games come to be from people who grew up in this age of MMOs, who might be passionate about it, but also understand that we also have limited time and barriers. Let's evolve it. Let's take the good things, but also add the new things, sprinkle that in, that will excite a new generation for MMOs.
Yeah, and just kind of closing thoughts on all of it. WoW held that system, like the way an MMO should be, for so long, and so many games tried to build on that. Again, I've already said that, but we're entering a time where now I think creativity is going to be rewarded, because this generation that grew up with it, again, no longer has this amount of time that we used to.
Anyway, I think the future is bright for the genre, and I think the third age has begun. I think this is going to be considered the golden age of the MMORPG, and I don't know what the fourth age will be, but if we ever get there, I would love to follow this video up with the fourth age of the MMO. But anyway, I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys enjoyed the series as it built up on itself. If you have thoughts of your own, you always let me know. You can reach out privately over on Discord or Twitter if you so choose. You can always take breaks from social media. It's very good for your mental health, and I would highly encourage you do that from time to time. Guys, I wish you all the best day possible, and hopefully I'll see you in future videos, but obviously no pressure whatsoever. I thank you so much for your time and your attention, and I wish you all the best. Thank you again for watching. Until next time, take care.
Good video.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with him for the most part. There's a change coming to MMOs. We've seen it for a while, no doubt. We may, in a video coming up, talk a little bit about Guild Wars 2, which I think was another game that kind of pushed the industry forward, but it was a little before players were quite ready to take the step. But I think it had a lot of those ideas, and so I kind of want to dive into that, being a Guild Wars 2 player. Yeah, I think it was a good video. I know I'm ready for the third age of MMOs. I'm looking at the landscape, and I know Lost Ark came out and a lot of people love it, but it wasn't for me, and I'm hoping that there's some more things on the horizon. Regardless, guys, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. We like doing these types of videos and seeing what other people in our space think, seeing where we disagree and agree. But anyway, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell if you want to be notified when our next video comes out, and we'll see you guys then. See ya.
See you next time.